Hello, and welcome to our presentation on alternative scholarship through tabletop games. My name is Ariel Vandershans, with me is Alex Mayhew, and our other partner is Sarah Cornwell, who couldn't make it for this presentation. Just a little about ourselves as we begin here. So as I said before, we're Ariel and Alex, and Sarah's with us. We're three PhD students at the University of Western Ontario. We have very diverse research areas. So for example, I'm studying the information-seeking behavior of fiction writers. And Alex, what are you studying?
I'm trying to design a new cataloging paradigm based off of biological phylogenetics, which I call phylomimetics.
And Sarah is also looking kind of at information-seeking behavior of second language learners as they come to Canada. So as you can see, our research is very diverse and doesn't necessarily have to do with games, but games are something that we're all passionate about. And as a group, we have some other friends that we usually meet. We used to meet weekly to play D&D together. And so gaming has always been a really big part of our friendship and of just our daily life. So we came to this idea of what can we do as a group for CAIS? And we were interested in creating then a new game that could be used to teach future librarians about the field. And so we came to it kind of with this role-playing concept of D&D and how can we get students to interact with what they might find in the field as they go on to become librarians or other informational professionals. So the background kind of that we then tied to this is Alex and I both took an MLIS course called Analog Games, in which we looked at the history of board games and where board games are now. They're certainly becoming quite the fad. We have board game cafes, we have board game libraries, game nights are really popular. And so this idea that games are now becoming very widely accepted in society and something that people love to do. And so why were games useful or good for education? And so one of the things that we looked at and we found at various university websites are ideas that the games are engaging. They're more engaging than lectures and readings, especially now with the younger generation of students who play a lot of video games and who enjoy engaging and participating in the class, but not only that, engaging with their students. And it's a little more interesting than just small group conversation when you get to do hands-on things and imagine different scenarios. And so in that, games are also really rewarding. There's a win-lose risk often that it motivates students to try to win the game. And so there's more stimulation in terms of what's around them and reading the cards and learning more about what their options are. And so it's often been used as training and education. There's medical training simulators. And so this idea that games are really good for stimulating students, engaging students, and provide a lot of rewards for students. And we kind of went forward with that and how can we make LIS more engaging for students, but not only that, help them understand what kind of real world encounters they may be facing and how they can tackle that as a group, because cooperation and teamwork is very important in a lot of the jobs that they will be facing. And so we think that our application for our game could definitely be a teaching tool in library schools, but also a training tool in libraries or other information organizations.
Okay, so the initial impetus for this project, well, one of them, came out of the American Library Association's Future Trends article. So in that article, they laid out a whole bunch of emerging situations that will be relevant to the field of library and information science going forward. So they had environmental concerns, automation, continuous learning, a variety of circumstances. And we thought these would be an interesting collection of encounters that a person might experience. So we kept on looking at other sources of encounters that people might have. So there's the news and current events. I'm sure we can all think of ongoing events that might be something that people in the information profession have to deal with in one way or another, and we all have personal experiences as well. And so we took all of these different situations that a professional might encounter, and we imagined them in the context of a role-playing game. So they would be in the Dungeons and Dragons mold. They would be the monsters you would fight against, and that initial framing is how we got to the idea of um, a role-playing game. We imagined each player would sit down as a librarian or an archivist, or their character would be a researcher or an educator. And they would, as these characters, they would encounter these various challenges. The concept evolved away from that after a while, but that's where it started. So each character would have their particular title skill. They would be the librarian, they would be the archivist, something like that. And then they'd have a variety of other skills that they would be able to use to cooperate with one another to be able to overcome the various encounters. Once we started really thinking about this in terms of it being an RPG, a role-playing game, we imagined that the characters that the players would create would have a variety of statistics that are often found in role-playing games. The big one that comes from Dungeons and Dragons is something like hit points or health points. Like how is your character's ability to like continue to do actions? And from that idea, we translated it into a more academic setting. This would be something like your credibility. So as long as you continue to have reasonable credibility score left, you can continue to perform actions. The next component that became very obviously important for us was the idea that as a cooperative game, different people have to be able to add together their relevant components, and the total should be more than the sum of the parts. In fact, it is more than sum of the parts. It became multiplicative. So some characters really are good at getting a wide reach. They can reach a whole lot of people, and that became one of our stats. Another group of people might be good at uh, being able to go deep, be able to advocate very strongly. They might not be able to reach as many people, but they can go in depth and be really, really convincing and motivating on particular issues. So if you combined your reach and your advocacy, you could be able to influence and have a much greater impact. So librarians would have a great deal of reach because they talk to a bunch of people, and educators would have a great deal of advocacy because they can deeply influence a few people. So if they combine their contributions to an encounter, and you multiply those together, it becomes a much larger impact than they would be able to do on their own. One of the other sources of inspiration here is that um, the player characters don't necessarily in the concept of the game don't necessarily uh, impact the encounters directly. What they do by spreading their reach and their advocacy is they motivate the public, and the public are the ones who, by virtue of ending up caring about a particular encounter, are in the concept of the game. They're the ones who actually are dealing with the encounter. And this idea was actually inspired directly from an old N64 video game called Superman 64, in which Superman, who is invulnerable, can't be hurt, but the city can be hurt. So the city has like a health bar, and you have to defeat the encounter before the city is destroyed. So we kind of reverse that for our game, where you have to like you as a player, you can be hurt or not. That's not the point. But in order to defeat the encounter, to overcome it, you have to motivate the world to care about it, as opposed to just directly tackling it yourself like you would in a traditional role-playing game. So this leads into more of the game design mechanics of how we came up with the various concepts. So as I said, we started off with very much a traditional role-playing game design based off of the Dungeons and Dragons mold. Very quickly, Ariel realized that if we did it as a traditional role-playing game, one player would have to sit aside and actually run the encounters. They would have to be the fake news and the corporate influence, and the other players would be playing against that game master, like in a traditional role-playing game. And that's a perfectly fun way to design games. But for an educational tool, we wanted people to be more on the same page to cooperate together in the same sorts of ways. And this led Ariel to suggest replacing the game master with a deck of cards. And this was directly inspired by games like Munchkin and Magic the Gathering, where you have your deck of cards and it provides the story. It provides the encounters that you, as the character, your player that you've your player character that you've created, will encounter. So various other mechanics came from other games. For example, Fiasco also was a strong motivator to consider games without a dedicated game master player. Um, it was an interesting way of thinking about role playing games in a different way, and games like Shea Geek got us onto the concept of using tokens to track our progress in various respects. So down in the corner here, you can see an advocacy token, a credibility token, a reach token, and these became useful for being able to play the game through various rounds. So in the end, gameplay evolved from a pure role-playing game in the style of Dungeons and Dragons to a much more hybrid deck-based game.
So after determining what kind of concepts we wanted and the game mechanics that we wanted, and we were quite certain we had settled on it and we had a solid game, the next big thing we had to work through was playtesting. So I ended up playtesting it first with my husband and ended up rage quitting because it was so difficult. And so one of the things we quickly realized is that this game is very unbalanced, and the initial character design created very weak characters, and the encounters were way too strong. And we couldn't get past a few rounds of the game before we were constantly dying and dying. So one of the first things that we looked at changing was, okay, so we've only initially given characters this many stats to work with. So now how many stats should we give them? And so we kind of tweaked that and altered that. And the encounters as well. So they were really high. How can we bring them down so we could affect certain players instead of all players, or limit the effects of whatever they have used their skill for? And so one way in which we also switched the balance was we moved from this idea of the 20-sided die, which was originally from our role-playing and D&D initial design concept. And so we moved into a 6-sided die concept because many people have 6-sided dies available to them, and it could allow us to cap not only the monster levels at 6 rather than 20, but also the players. So one of the things we realized in additional playtesting is that when we were playing it, it was well balanced at the beginning, but near the end, before we had any caps in play on the players, we got so powerful that the moment we flipped over an encounter, we were like, whatever, we can defeat it, no big deal. And so about 3/4 of the way through, there was no point in playing the game anymore because we were only increasing our stats, and the monster or the encounters were no longer a challenge to us. And so being able to slowly tweak the players, but also the encounters to find that balance. And so the initial game started off with a lot of blank cards, which are now called quiet years. And I think there were 10 or 7 of them. There were a lot. And while it helped, it also wasn't as interesting. So what could those blank cards turn into? So we had professional development, and then, okay, we have way too many professional developments happening, so that's why our players are getting overpowered. How can we balance that out? So some of those blank cards then became setbacks, which remove skill points. We also introduced perks. So some of the blank cards now became perks, which allow certain characters to take one of these cards and now become a keynote speaker or a public figure, which gives them additional abilities. And of course, making sure that whatever we added to the players, we tried to balance out in the encounters. And so as we continued to play through our game, we found more of a balance. And so while the game right now is really great for 3 players, if you wanted to do 4 players or 5 players, you may find more tweaks are needed, or the game is too long, and so you need to remove some of the cards and create a more randomized deck for shorter games. And so we've allowed it to be a bit more flexible and open. And that was always kind of one of the ideas from the start, which is also what D&D is. It's open and flexible. So that was how our playtesting took this game and slowly evolved it, slowly tweaked it. It's still in the tweaking phase. You can play it now, you can enjoy it right now, but it's always open to new suggestions. And so that's where we go into this next concept that we really wanted to bring with this game.
So one of the things we really wanted, as Ariel was saying, is we wanted it to be very flexible and very open so that it could be customized to your particular situation as a teaching tool. If you're using this as a training tool in a library, you may wish to create a deck that has a lot of the types of encounters that mimic the encounters that you have at your local library. So in order to do this, what we intend to do is have this game released under a Creative Commons license so that it is freely available. It's open source. It is free as in free beer. It's also free as in free speech. Anyone can take it and use it and modify it and hopefully give their contributions back to the community so that everyone can enjoy the ideas that you wanted to contribute. Now, this is obviously not the first time a game has gone in this particular direction. So Dungeons and Dragons, for example, has what's called the open game license. It's not quite appropriate to what we're doing here, but there is a tradition of making games openly available. And we really do want to make sure that there is this community involvement. We want to make sure that as we ourselves are going to continue to contribute material to the game, that other people will be able to create their own material. You know, it's as a Creative Commons license. All you have to do is put on a little attribution saying, this is where we got it. Here's the material that I'm adding to it. And everyone will be able to use that material going forward. So with that community involvement, this teaching tool can be richer and richer over time. And that's what we hope to accomplish. So in conclusion, please take time to watch our gameplay video to learn more about how the game works and how it's fun. During our recording of that gameplay video, we were all very tempted just to keep on playing it right to the end. Unfortunately, time constraints prevented that. The game itself will be available as a PDF for download. It will include all the rules, a page that'll have all the various cards, and a page that'll have all the various tokens. You just cut them out, you shuffle them into a deck. I'd recommend cardstock for the cards themselves. And give it a go. The default deck is pretty fun as it is. You might want to have like a six-sided die or a coin or something to flip for some of the mechanics, but other than that, you really won't need anything else other than the downloaded PDF and a pair of scissors. We ourselves will be available at October 9th from 2 to 2:30 on Zoom for the for the CAIS conference, and we will be happy to answer your questions and engage in conversations about our game called Our LIS Careers. Thank you. And references if you're interested.